So my name's Pete Ward. I teach in the theology department here. And as Josh has said, back in the day, I wrote quite a lot about youth ministry. And this paper is probably my last hurrah. It's yeah. I said lots of friends here, so it's lovely to see people that I know. And I said to John, the subtitle of this is Why I Was Right All Along, but Nobody Listened.
To go out.
And the interesting thing about the paper is that it came out in a blog. I wrote this paper for an organisation called the International Association for the Study of Youth Ministry that met in Manchester, and I was shamed into attending it by the president, the chair of it at present, Chantel, who then promptly didn't show up herself. So I felt really cheated that I'd had to go to this really horrible part of Manchester to give this paper. And then she wasn't there. But anyway, I did give this paper. It came out in a blog of a week or so, I forget, month after or something like that. Within a week, about 2,000 people had read it. But more interestingly, the head of absolutely everything in the Church of England, they had all rung me up or sent me emails, and I had meetings throughout the next month with the head of everything. You know, quite literally, the chair of this, chair of that, chair of that, chair of that, bishop of this. They all wanted to talk about it. But since then, they've gone rather quiet on me when I asked for some money to do some more research. Isn't that interesting? So they were kicking the fence posts, I think. But anyway, you can judge for yourself. Is this is it a last hurrah that we can all celebrate and then leave me alone, or is it significant or not? I called the paper Beyond Ecclesiocentrism. I'm going to leave loads of time to discuss. I won't be talking for a long time. I don't think, anyway. So Beyond Ecclesiocentrism. One of the things that I'm doing this year is I'm standing in for a person called Mike Higton, and he is the chair of the Common Awards. So that's the academic side of the training, particularly the Church of England, but other churches, Methodist Church and others. Durham University validates all of these courses. And for this year, I'm in charge, which is just hilarious, really. But as a result, I've been involved in conversations. And for those of you that aren't part of the Church of England, there are Church of England specific things about what I'm wanting to say and why I'm wanting to say them. But I think there's a message that might be more generally of relevance in the points that I want to make. So I became aware, being the chair of Common Awards, of these developments in the Church of England, the vision and strategy, or whatever it's called now, and that there's this aspiration to train 30,000 youth and children's workers. Actually, it might be estates workers and other lay ministries and important things like that as well. The 10% of those will be paid either full-time or part-time by the church. And what's interesting is that they voted tens of millions. In fact, it's hundreds of millions to fund this. Not just that, it's not hundreds of millions to fund the training, it's hundreds of millions to fund the work, of which we will need to train the people. Crammer Hall and others are deeply involved in all of this, and everybody's scrabbling around to see how they can get things going that will give them some of the money. And there are lots and lots of rabbits running at the moment, without a doubt. And there are various pilot schemes that the church is chucking money at in different places to train these people. And this is live and real. And the truth of the matter is, whatever we think or anyone thinks, they're going to spend this money to do this stuff. And the money might be spent in good ways, or it might be spent in really dreadful ways. And I think that it's incumbent on those of us that are theologically engaged in issues of theology, ministry practice, church planting, to try and be a critical friend to all of this, is my concern. If you've been involved in youth ministry education, I think I set up the very first youth ministry course in Britain back in the day. So I've had skin in this game going back 13 years or so, might be longer. And I've never, ever seen a situation like we've got now. Never. We're on the verge of something extraordinary in terms of the Church of England's investment in work with young people and children. And it seemed to me that, I mean, there's a lot of panic in the around at the moment, but there's also everyone wanting to get on the bandwagon. But I felt that having been involved in this for however long, what are the lessons that might be learned, I think. So I think I want to start with but. Before we all rub our hands in the youth ministry world and the TEI theological world and the diocesan youth people world and the church planting world, before we all rub our hands and go, goodness, at last there's significant investment in what we're doing. As I say, I think I set up the first youth ministry course about 30 years ago, but there were others, you know, Moorlands College and Oasis and Centre for Youth Ministry got going, and all sorts of other stuff has happened. We had a massive upsurge in the training of youth ministers and children's ministers to a lesser degree. And I think the first but that makes me want to ask us all to pause. The church isn't going to pause, it's going to spend the money, whatever. But I think we should pause, if you know what I mean. Is that we've had a 30-year history of training, particularly youth ministers. And yet, despite that, we're now in a situation where the church is so panicked, they're going to spend hundreds of millions. In other words, despite the training, we've not stemmed the tide. That should cause us to rethink. In other words, do we actually know how to do this? Have we been training people to do the wrong things in the wrong way? Or we need to ask ourselves honestly, what's wrong with what we've been doing? it's not just the lack of numbers of young people and children in the churches across the board. It's actually although we've been training youth ministers and children's ministers for 30 odd years, most churches can't find one for love or money. I think they might spontaneously combust. Or actually, I think they're being burned, to be honest. And the churches need to hold their hands up and say, how have we not nurtured and created a good space for these people over the years? So this paper is, in a sense, trying to address some of my pause for thoughts. They're my perspectives on it. Others will have other perspectives. But the paper has this title, Beyond Ecclesiocentrism. And I'd like to make a brief excursion into missiology, partly because most of what I wrote about youth ministry was inspired by mission studies and inspired by the church around the world, and particularly inspired by questions of Christianity and culture that arise in world Christianity and the history of mission studies. So I want to go back there because I think it's creates an important frame. But before I say that, I did write all these things in other books. And one of them was Liquid Church, which was brilliant. It was a fantastic seller. Never made me any money. People bought it, read it, and then didn't do it. Is the truth of it. So one of the people that inspired my thinking was the late Lamin Sanneh, Ghanaian mission theologian, and lights went on in my head when I read this book, Translating the Message. And interestingly, Lamin Sanneh makes a distinction in the book between mission that takes place through what he calls diffusion and mission that takes place through translation. So in short, diffusion. No, let's take translation first. Sanneh talks about the importance of translating the faith into the vernacular, so local language, the local dialect. That attracted me when I was doing youth ministry, because I felt that the church didn't speak the language of the young people that I was meeting way back when. That there was a cultural distinction between the life of the church and just normal young people that aren't in church. And mission studies spoke to me, this notion of the vernacular. How do we express faith in the vernacular? How do we express church in the vernacular? My sense was that church, as we were doing it and as we knew it, wasn't doing that. Sanneh then also talks about diffusion. And diffusion, instead of this contextualizing process of translating into the vernacular, diffusion is where we've already done that. The church has already been contextualized in some way, and then it can just simply reproduce itself by spreading. So there are these two different patterns. They're interrelated, they're not necessarily one's good, one's bad. They're two different ways of doing mission. If I understand Sammy correctly. But there is a distinction between them. Now, I think that we could characterize our journey over the last 20 odd years, maybe 30, in the conversation around particularly church planting, as a dialogue between two forms of mission, one which could be called diffusion and one which could be called translation. And I think that Leslie Newbegin, Leslie Newbegin in the Newbegin terms, not in the way that the American discourse around missional church made Newbegin. In other words, Newbegin through Bart, but a real Newbegin. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And actually, although I put Gospel in Pluralist Society, I think the Foolishness to the Greeks book, the little books that he put out with World Catholic Churches, probably were the best expression of what he was talking about. And Newbegin was advocating translation of the translation. He saw that the church was not connected to our society. And he challenged the church to a new form of missional thinking in the West. And I think for myself and many others, that was like a big inspiration. And it lies behind the thinking of fresh expressions, new forms of church, alternative worship. Again, let's not talk about emerging church, because it's not very helpful. But the British stuff. And the other form of missional thinking, I think, is characterized by the church growth movement and McGavran and Peter Wagner and everything that came out of Fuller. And as any of you that have been reading about these things know, there are direct links between that thinking, Fuller Theological Seminary, Trinity Brompton, New Wine, the historic links are all there for you to read about. And the fact is that McGavran and church planting in its form as diffusion has won the day. That's where we're putting money into. We have. That's what everybody thinks is the way forward. Young clergy realise that translation doesn't lead to big churches, and there are jobs, but diffusion is a better bet. We know how to do it because we can see it, and there are people with bags of money that are going to throw at us money to do it. So I think the story of the last 30 years is about a debate between which way we do mission and which ones, who's winners and who's losers. And I think we need to be honest about that. And again, if we go with Lamin Sunday, it's not that one is good and one is bad. It's that they both might have a place. But I think I want to argue that we've lost the translation gene.
Yeah.
Way back, I wrote a book, Youth Book in the Mission of God, which was the Americans' publication unhelpfully called it God at the Mall. It never mentions anything to do with shopping. But, you know, you're in their hands, aren't you? Anyway, God at the Mall, youth work and the mission of God. Talk about two different ways that you do youth ministry quickly. That you can start by gathering Christian young people into a group. And then your hope is that you develop activities and people get attracted towards that group in the hope that you can grow what goes on. And I think the majority of what we do in our churches have followed this pattern of the basic recipe of children's work or youth work is we gather the children of Christian parents and then we add to them. And youth work and the mission of God said, well, there's that way, and it's good and necessary, but there's also another way, which is more missional, more relational, is about thinking about where the majority of young people are, rather than the young people that we've already got. So we start with, where are all the young people? Let's go there. So I said that stuff ages ago. And the fact is, everybody went with one bit, but not the other bit, I think. What we've seen is that patterns of ministry amongst young people and children have tended to be of the first type. Let's gather Christian young people, and then let's add to them. And that's tended to be, I think, that model has won out. It's won out because for a number of reasons. One reason is the people that fund youth and children's work are generally churchgoers, and their priorities are their own kids. And for all the language about we really want to reach out, there are lots of instances where people have actually reached out, but because it threatens the kids in the church, they've been, you know, they found tensions there. And what we realise is that the church basically its priority is to look after its own. Quite right too. We must look after our own. We mustn't put our kids at risk. We mustn't do things that mess up passing on the faith from one generation to another. We simply must not. However, 99.9% of the kids are not in our churches. And if we want to be, we have aspirations for the Church of England, we have aspirations to be a church for the nation, or at least England, or if as churches we have aspirations that we reach out to everyone, we need to be thinking about not just gathering Christian kids together, but how do we reach all those other kids? Now, what actually happened was, and this is it's a classic way that we subvert missional thinking, is we adopt the language without doing it. That's what goes on. So what people said was, brilliant. We're going to do our Christian group, but we're going to be relational. And what eventually happened is that they didn't do the missional thing. They just did what they were doing before. So adopting the language makes it look like you're doing it, but you're not. I think there's another problem, and that has come from, ironically, from the thing that's given us all so much life, the charismatic movement, from the way that it's transformed the church life, the reason why we've got lots of young people and young leaders and so on over the years, the lively churches that we've got have all been influenced by charismatic movement, but via Wimber. Now, specific to my argument, there are a few things to say, but I think there's some more important things to say. As I meet more and more people who are heartbroken because of the abuse that they've suffered, I couldn't sleep listening to one person talk to me. But the horrible heartbreak that we have inflicted on 2-3 generations of our most lively young people cannot be underestimated. And I don't think in the wider church circles, people are taking it anywhere near seriously enough. When I get this presentation in Manchester, somebody said, how can we trust the church to be able to do youth and children's work? And they're right in some ways. So there's soul searching that we need to bear in mind. But actually, I think there's a deeper theological question, which is, was the theology and practice itself abusive? In other words, to what extent does the theology and the practice of contemporary worship facilitate frameworks that enable abuse? There's a second question I think linked to this, which I think, and let me just say, it pains me, but it might be that Martin Percy was right. Having argued against it for quite some time, maybe he's got a point in that early book. But there's more of an issue, which is we now have nearly all of our lively young leaders have grown up thinking the only way you meet God is by singing songs. Now, I'm old enough to know a time when that wasn't the case. The youth group I was part of in the 70s, we just sat in this very kindly old lady's front room on her dusty sofas with Bibles and cups of coffee, and we met God through prayer and Bible study and fellowship. But we've now got generations who literally do not know another way to meet God. Because part of the theology was, this is the main event. This is where God comes to us when we sing these songs. I don't think we shouldn't trust ourselves to take the money if we haven't got another way of thinking about things. I think. Enough said about that.
Yeah.
For those of us that were part of this conversation, which church planting is a part, we started to use the word church. It came because of another abusive environment, the 9 o'clock service, and alternative worship and all of that. But we started to want to talk about youth churches and fresh expressions of churches come out of it. And we've started to use the word church for things that previously were thought of as mission. It was a brilliant plan, because when we started calling our youth stuff church, all these church people realized, oh, I ought to be taking responsibility for this. When we were in Oxford doing our thing, the bishop came to visit. Why? Because we called it church. See, we could leverage some money and influence because we call it church. When you call it mission, church people, like, they're not interested. They think that's something else. We pay, and mission societies do that. Church, suddenly it's us. Then what happened is church folk got their hands on mission and started to say, well, if it's church, it needs to do this, it needs to have this, we need to do that. Is it really church? There was one person who did a sort of survey with 15 characteristics. They would ring up mission projects and say, there are these questions. And if they ticked enough of the boxes, it was really church. I've known other senior church people look me in the face and say, well, we don't fund mission type stuff. We want real church. Rowan Williams backed fresh expressions of church, but he created a Eucharistic criteria. He said it's church if it's Eucharistic. All of these things actually meant that church people got their hands on mission and messed it up, I think, if I'm honest. By calling it church, very interesting, common awards. What's the degree everyone gets? It's an undergraduate degree in theology and mission. But actually, it then makes everyone think that they're sort of mission. But actually, most of them aren't, to be honest, because they're running churches. And churches are really, really important. We must run churches. It's not that churches are a bad thing, but we also need to do mission. Diffusion is a good thing, but we also must do translation. Why must we do translation? Because very, very few people are in our churches. And then there's this issue of burning the youth ministers by not giving them enough money and all that sort of stuff. So I think that might be my last slide. Who knows? But I suppose my message is, unless we start to think more broadly and unthink ecclesiocentrism and re-embrace missional models of work, yeah, there was an important point that I was going to make that went with one of those slides once upon a time. And that was, why do we need to do missional models? Yeah, people aren't in our churches. But more to the point, particularly the Church of England, the figures are phenomenal about how many churches have no children and no young people. The numbers are just outrageous. I don't know what they are. When you go to church house or whatever, they have all these things imprinted on their minds. It's sort of, there's a kind of, there's tattoos and brands of, I was at Lambeth Palace talking to a mate of mine, and he got this thing off the wall and he said, well, if this diocese doesn't grow by this amount over this time to these numbers, and by now they didn't do it, so they're now down this much. Numbers is something that all those people in those positions are obsessed with. But the brute fact is if we have churches with no children and no young people, and our only model of doing youth ministry is gather the children you've got.
Yeah.
Can you see it's not working?
Yeah.
It's not a good plan. It's simply not a good plan. I personally think that the thing that the Church of England has, which are, and it also pains me to say it, the two things that we've got that are possibilities of hope are the parish church and schools. And we need plans that link these together. And I think the relational, missional thinking needs to be applied to how those two interrelate. Part of our problem is we've got really good youth ministry people that are committed to the church thing, and we've got people that are really now advocating the school thing, this thing called Flourish, that's going to have loads of money spent. But what we need is thinking that brings these things together, that sees the connection between them, and that develops realistic plans for how we make those connections. And I'd say the parish church because I'm having gone down the route of let's do new forms of church and alternative worship and youth churches and all the rest. I think I've eventually come to the view that the only way we will get security and a position in the institution of the Church of England is through the parish. Bishops' mission orders and all this stuff. We've just seen it flounder. So the best way is capture the parish. Capture the parish for mission. Yeah, take that and make it what it says it wants to be.
Yeah, there we go.
What it says it wants to be, take it seriously. In other words, the church for the whole neighborhood. So that would be my parting thing. If we don't take some of the things that I'm trying to say somewhere near seriously, and there might be other things to say, I think the millions that are on offer might well be wasted. Quite a lot of it will be wasted anyway, because lots of people have got lots of ideas that frankly are a bit of the solution, but not the whole solution on the whole.